Hello, I'm Cheryl McCarthy. Welcome to One to One. It's called critical race theory, and it's become a hot topic on conservative talk shows and in Republican led state legislatures. By last summer, 8 states had passed laws that banned teaching it in public schools, and almost 20 additional states have introduced or are planning to introduce similar laws. What is critical race theory? Why is it getting so much attention now? And what is the result of banning it? Here to answer these questions is Terry Watson, Associate Professor in the Department of Leadership and Human Development at the City College of New York. She uses critical race theory in her classes. Welcome.
Thank you, Cheryl. I appreciate you having me for this important and timely conversation.
So, what is critical race theory and what are its origins?
So critical race theory is founded in the work of the legal scholar Derek Bell. In the 1970s, he and other scholars were concerned with the lack thereof of racial progress and how many of the laws and policies, particularly those in schools, seem to permeate racism. And critical race theory is simply a lens that helps us understand the racial ramifications, if you will, of particular policies and practices. So if you look at it with the lens of race, and while we look at it through this kind of black-white paradigm, there are other ways to look at race, meaning, from a Latinx perspective, from an Asian perspective, is simply a critical race theory, in short, is simply a critical look at a policy, a practice, a history, a people. It's a very personalized perspective, if you will, because it is founded on and in race.
And it basically says that racism is not just individual, that it's systemic, that it permeates all of our institutions in this country, right?
Right. So critical race theory, what it does is it just looks at not individual actors per se, because people are good and just and fair. But if you look at the policies and the systems in and of itself, we will see that is where the inequity lies. So critical race theory helps us to understand the function of race, to pull it out, to examine it, and then to remedy it.
Why is there so much talk about critical race theory right now?
I think with the 1619 Project, with the presidency of Donald J. Trump, that, and even the current pandemic and how it disproportionately affects, for us, Black America, critical race theory is forcing America to reckon with itself, to look at how it treats its people. And when I say its people, Black people in particular, although again, critical race theory can look at any race per se. It doesn't have to be necessarily this black-white paradigm.
I gathered that a man named Charles Rufo, a conservative at the Manhattan Institute, somebody who's been reporting on diversity training programs at companies and federal agencies and schools, went on Fox News last year, charging that the goal of critical race theory is to instill guilt in white Americans. He called on President Trump to take action against it. And as a result, Trump ordered federally funded agencies to stop teaching anything that resembled critical race theory. And he also created his own something called the 1776 Commission to counter the teaching of critical race theory. I should note that when President Biden came in, he rescinded Trump's executive order and disbanded the 1776 Commission. But in a number of, once this Rufo and Trump got this conversation started, a number of school districts around the country, it has become a contentious issue. In Loudoun County, Virginia, parents called for the recall of the entire school board after it required mandatory teacher training in implicit bias. And in June, the Florida Board of Education approved a rule that instruction cannot define American history as anything other than the creation of a nation based largely on universal principles stated in the Declaration of Independence. We even have some politicians who are running on critical race theory platforms, the way politicians have run on the, abortion
Mhm.
issue. It seems that Donald Trump's slogan, "Make America Great Again," has evolved into "Teach that America is great again." Is
Mhm.
that what's going on?
Very much so. And this assault on critical race theory, which has been out for more than 40 years, it's simply America refusing to reckon with its history and to, in many ways, rewrite history and create a master narrative, one that purports, white supremacy or this manifest destiny, this greatness of America. But when you look at the very founding of this country, you will see that it was founded, by robbers and those who came here because they were persecuted. They were treated unjustly, and they came here to start again. But the formerly oppressed became the oppressor, hence the enslavement and the 1776 Commission, which is really a pushback on the 1619 Project, which simply is a series of essays that centers the experiences of Black America, because our history is a part of America's history, but it's from, who tells the story.
Do you think this outcry against critical race theory is also a pushback against the Black Lives Matter movement?
Very much so, because what people keep turning Black Lives Matter is that it negates all others. No, Black Lives Matter simply saying that there is an assault on Black life. And unfortunately, with the murder of George Floyd last year, it brought it to America's, front door, because it was recorded and seen around the world. The Black Lives Matter movement became active in all 50 states and in every continent across the globe, so that not just Black people, but people are demanding that humanity be acknowledged. And the death of George Floyd showed us the impact of race and racism in policing. And this is not new in Black America. We know this from the death of Trayvon Martin. We know this from the death of, so many others that have died, throughout the years. It just didn't start with George Floyd, but it simply continues. And we so happen to actually watch George Floyd, death. We literally witnessed that. And so we can't get away from it.
It seems that this outcry against teaching anything like critical race theory in the public schools is a bogus issue, because is critical race theory even taught in public schools?
Very much, it definitely is not. Um, I didn't learn CRT till I was in graduate school. And it's mainly taught in graduate programs and in law schools because it stems from the law field. Moreover, I think what people and what those and my colleagues in K through 12 are reckoning with is, how do we teach young people about not just the function of race, but racism? Because race is created, it's a social construct, there's nothing wrong with it. But what happens when we discriminate or we have these biased opinions? And so when many consider the teaching of CRT is just those in K to 12 spaces trying to reckon with righting some of the wrongs, because unfortunately, schools are one of the first places that young people experience race-based discrimination. And we know that based on opportunity gaps, graduation rates, AP classes, advanced curriculums, who's promoted, who's excluded, who matters and who doesn't. And schools have shown us long before the Brown decision that they are not race neutral spaces. And critical race theory brings race to the forefront, meaning they ask us to look at who our students are and how can we best address their specific race-based needs, culturally based needs.
City College's Department of Leadership and Human Development is what used to be called the college's education department, right?
Very much so.
So you're basically training students to become teachers and school supervisors. Give me some examples of how you bring critical race theory into your classes?
Well, as a professor of educational leadership, I'm charged to help prepare teachers who wish to become building and school leaders. And in fact, a few weeks ago, I published an article with the Journal of Cases in Educational Leadership. And it's simply a case study, and it's titled Challenging Whiteness at Claremont High School. So what I did is I looked at a school policy, hair. And as you know, with the passing of the Crown Act, hair is a very big deal for Black girls in particular, because we are often judged based on how we wear our hair. And in this particular case study, the young lady simply wore her hair in its natural state, and it was deemed unruly. And so the question I asked was, how can one's natural hair in its natural form be, illegal? And because she didn't chemically straighten her hair, it wasn't kind of tamed the way the teacher would like it. She was sent out of the classroom because she was found to be violating the school's dress code policy, because her hair was deemed a distraction, but it was simply, she wore her hair in its natural state in an Afro style. And so by creating that case study, I asked students to look at this particular, policy, or how this policy was carried out, and was that fair? And then looking at the Crown Act and why that was created, and why we must respect, people's hair and allow Black women, girls, or whomever to wear their hair, especially in its natural state, the way they should. It's simply who they are. So by saying that it has to be straightened, or it has to be styled in a particular way, we are actually discriminating against that child. And that does a lot for a child's self-esteem. That does a lot for promoting quote unquote values and norms that don't speak life to that child. We're telling her that her hair, does not conform, to the schoolhouse, that there's not, so we're not critiquing the policy, we're critiquing the child and telling her that there's something inherently wrong with her because her hair is simply the way it is. She can't control that.
Have you actually discussed that case study in any of your classes yet?
The case study was literally published this month. I will be using it in the fall. I know that many of my colleagues are using it, and I'm actually going to Skype into their classrooms to help aspiring teachers and teacher leaders understand our own biases and the ways that we purport white supremacy, meaning, we say things are good and bad, or certain behaviors or styles of dress, or even the way a student speaks, we say, we give it a value judgment. And how can we, pass judgment on the way someone speaks, be it with an accent or not, or how they choose to style their hair, or even their individuality in dressing. Many students want to express themselves with the way they wear their hair and or clothing, and that should be okay. Schools must be safe and liberatory spaces if all children are to learn and grow. And we have to allow children to be who they are, to experiment, to try new things. And if it's a new hairstyle or a clothing style, as long as it's not harming them, then I don't see what the problem is. I think for us as the teachers and school leaders, we have to look at these laws and policies that we are enforcing in schools and see who we are, denying, free expression to. Who are we telling, what's good and what's bad?
We've already said that what's happening now is the conversation, it's sort of a bogus issue because critical race theory is not being taught in public schools. My question for you is, should it be taught in public schools? I'm talking about at the elementary and junior high and high school level.
I think the concept itself is rather complex, and you need a certain knowledge of other things like laws and policies, like understanding Brown v. Board of Education, reading that case, reading the witness testimony, reading the work of Kenneth B. Clark. I think we have to understand how race and racism functions in society before we can really teach people how to grasp or even how to utilize critical race theory, because it's a tool. So yes, we look at race, but then we ask ourselves, based on what we now know about this race-based perspective, we know that very few laws and policies are race neutral. So knowing that, how do we remedy it? And I don't think that 5 and 6 year olds, or even those in K through 12, are prepared to remedy it, but they should be aware of racism. They should be aware that bias is not good, and that it's not right to discriminate against someone based on how they look or their particular, culture or style of dress. So I think we should teach acceptance and diversity, and to celebrate differences, and knowing that what makes us different is what makes America America, and understanding and respecting those different lived experiences. I think that's what we should teach. Again, I don't think that young people are equipped intellectually to handle critical race theory in K through 12 spaces.
Some people would say that teaching younger students, not necessarily 5, but students who are in elementary school, high school, anything about the fact that racism exists in this country is going to make white children feel guilt and shame.
I would ask, what does it do for the lived experiences of Black and brown children? What about Trayvon Martin? What about these children that we lose to violence, who don't understand how their mere appearance is a trigger for some people, that people fear them, especially when they're no longer, cute and cuddly. And I don't think that we have to center the needs of white people or white children in our teaching. I think good teaching is just that. And I think if we are to combat racism, we have to help children understand the need for diversity, and how it's okay to be different, and how we have to respect everyone, regardless of what they may look like, the texture of their hair, how they wear their clothes, how they speak. I think that starts in the schoolhouse, because again, schools are amongst the first places where young people experience race-based discrimination. If we're to counter that, then we have to teach a diversity, not just in opinions, but also in cultures, in learning styles, and even the teachers who we have in front of them. I think it matters if your teacher looks like you or not, especially for Black students.
One CUNY professor that I read argued that the controversy over critical race theory is a distraction from the fact that a lot of Black public school students around the country are doing poorly academically, that they have lower high school, they have lower test scores, lower high school graduation rates, lower grades than other students. So my question is, does teaching critical race theory, does that do anything to actually improve the improvement levels of Black students?
Again, critical race theory is not taught in K-12 spaces. Moreover, I think that teachers with a knowledge of critical race theory, with a knowledge of the function of race and racism in our society, are better prepared to teach diverse students. And I guess my colleague who said that Black students are failing, I would argue that schools are failing Black students, and that many would argue that that is it's simply the status quo. In 1935, W.E.B. Du Bois asked, does the Negro need separate schools? And Du Bois said, she does not. What Black children need is simply adults, teachers who care about them, and who have a knowledge of who they are as individuals and as a people. And what we're finding, that a majority of the teaching force are white young women with little to no experience in different cultures other than their own. So the disconnect that we have in the classroom is the disconnect not between the student and the school, but between the teacher and the student, because the teacher has little to no knowledge of her student. And I think that's what CRT helps us to ensure, that you know who's in front of you. You know who you're required to educate, not teach, but educate, because there's a difference, because we want to create lifelong learners. But if you don't know who your students are, where they come from, what's in their culture, their language, their vocabulary, then how can we be effective if we have no knowledge of who they are as a people? And that's what the 1619 Project is. It gives you that Black-centered perspective that I think is missing in America's classroom, which speaks to the opportunity gaps that we have.
I suspect that some of these laws that wants to ban the teaching of critical race theory in public schools. You know, public schools, a lot of we have colleges and universities that are also publicly funded. So I imagine some of those laws would affect the teaching of critical race theories in places like the City University, you know, although that's not happening in New York. And I gather you would feel that that would be a real tragedy if critical race theory could not even be taught at the college and university level.
I can't even imagine it, because race is so central, particularly in New York City, where the majority of our students in K through 12 are Black and brown. So if we can't speak to their realities, if we can't make sense with them of what they're living through, particularly in this pandemic and this Black Lives Matter movement, we have to use schools as a place for conversation, a place for ideas, and a place where we create our next generations of scholars and teachers and movement builders. So I think that, you know, education and CRT should go hand in hand, because that's where the inequity begins for young people in the schoolhouse, with, you know, resources being denied, experienced teachers, technology. There's certain divides that exist in our classrooms that we know are race-based. It's, you know, what happens in District 5 doesn't happen in District 2. And we know that in Harlem. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we remedy this? Well, we simply make clear to our students and their parents and the community what our reality is, and more importantly, why, so that when we have, you know, the upcoming election, you know, we know who to vote for, why we're voting, what policy should be on the agenda, how do we set our own agenda to make sure that our needs are being met in the schoolhouse, because that's where it all starts.
So with this controversy going on over critical race theory, what do you want the viewers of this show to leave here knowing?
To know that critical race theory, you know, it's been demoted to like this dirty acronym, almost like race, like this bad 4-letter word. So knowing that critical race theory is not a bad thing, it's simply a tool that helps us to understand particular lived experiences. And it gives a needed light to the realities that people experience that we may not know about, because we simply have not walked in their shoes. And critical race theory demands that we have a critical look at policies and practices that continually marginalize Black and brown people.
And it's important for everybody to know about them.
Exactly, because it's us today, but it's you tomorrow. And so it matters what happens in Black and brown communities, and also in white communities. It matters everywhere. You know, everything matters to someone. And so while we are concerned, I saw one sign that said there's one race. Yes, it is. But there's multiple lived experiences, and we have to speak life and give light to all of those experiences. And CRT simply assures that that happens across the board. It's not just this Black-white paradigm like it's often pitted against. No, CRT is for everybody.
Okay. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I'd like to thank Terry Watson, Associate Professor in the Department of Leadership and Human Development at the City College of New York, for joining me today. To learn about our upcoming shows, you can follow us on Twitter at One2One CUNY TV. For the City University of New York and One2One, I'm Cheryl McCarthy.